Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. R. Kelly's ex-girlfriend faces cross-examination. The horrifying testimony about being forced to eat feces as women were allegedly locked in the singer's home.
They did not know a world without R. Kelly in it because of the limitations that he placed on them.
And the former school resource officer during the Parkland shooting will have to stand trial. His attorney responding as parents say the officer hid during the massacre.
Everything he did was meant to save lives.
Plus, the man who was the naked baby on Nirvana's breakthrough album is suing the band. The now 30-year-old calling the cover image child pornography. And later,
I don't kill a lot.
Robert Durst's 50th day on trial. The real estate heir facing more rounds of cross-examination by the prosecution.
I stolen for time, I'm in jail.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. We begin with day 6 of R. Kelly's sex crimes trial. R. Kelly's former girlfriend, identified only as Jane Doe number 5, described years of abuse. Now, she's faced cross-examination by Kelly's defense. While Jane Doe 5 said on direct that R. Kelly forced her to lie to others about being with him, the defense tried to attack her credibility through the letters she wrote. In those letters, Jane, as she's not using her real name, defended R. Kelly and said that her family was using her to get money from R. Kelly and destroy his career. Jane read letters to the jury that she wrote to her family while she was living with R. Kelly as one of his girlfriends. In one letter, she accuses her mother of telling Kelly he needs to send $10,000 to a bank account monthly for sleeping with her daughter. The defense tried to drive home the idea that Jane and her family were using R. Kelly for his money. But on redirect, Jane told the jury that the letters were R. Kelly's idea to protect him in case of a trial like this one. The prosecution ended redirect with a fury of questions about getting STDs from Kelly, being told to write false letters, being forced to have sex with other females and a male, and chastisement or spankings, all from R. Kelly. So why would a woman want to stay with R. Kelly during the time of the alleged abuse? Terry Austin spoke with a clinical psychologist to explain.
Dr. Catherine Coleman told me R. Kelly likely targeted his victims for a reason, finding vulnerable people to control.
Nearly all of them were aspiring singers. And so they see R. Kelly as this, really this celebrity, this guy who's really started and was able to make Aaliyah into the performer and celebrity that she was. And there's this hope that he can do the same thing for them. And so that's probably quite a bit of what keeps them in this relationship of, if I just stick it out a little bit longer, I can be famous too.
Exactly. We saw that Jane Doe number 5, she testified and she actually said that he physically abused her, that she got cuts from being spanked by him, that she was made to urinate in a cup and even eat feces. That sort of behavior is extreme. What would make someone continue even after that sort of behavior?
Well, you see this a lot in the cycle of abuse, whether it's with domestic violence, is that there's oftentimes this, we call it this honeymoon or this princess period that keeps people sticking around, is that they suffer abuse and then afterwards the abuser provides them with something. He really kept them isolated and he took care of them financially and made sure that they had shelter over their heads. This really restricts their freedom and their ability to even think of a life without him. So this is going to keep them in that cycle of abuse.
Joining us today is legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Dina, R. Kelly's team is focusing on minor inconsistencies rather than attacking Jane Doe's more shocking allegations, like being forced to eat feces. Why do you think that is?
Well, the last thing they want to do is remind the jury yet again about that shocking allegation. So instead, they're going to attack her credibility by, 1,000 small pieces. And that could actually be very effective. If they do convince the jury that she was lying in all these other instances, then they're going to imply that she's also lying in this shocking allegation. It's also possible they're finished with the questioning, they may kind of go into that a little bit more with that specific allegation as well.
Interesting. Now, Terry, the cross and redirect of Jane Doe 5 is going back and forth on the truthfulness of these letters written by Jane. The defense only needs one juror. Could this have created some doubt in Jane's testimony?
It may have, Brian, but I don't think so, because this letter is something that the defense wants people to believe, but why would anyone write this unless they were forced to write this? It says that the parents wanted to extort Kelly and that he, was seduced by them and that they lied about their age. Why would anybody write that down unless they were forced to do it? And if they were forced to eat feces, I think the jury would really believe that they were forced to write this type of letter, which apparently, according to the testimony by Jane, he made her write it for collateral. So I think there could be some doubt, but at the end of the day, I think the jury's going to believe Jane.
Yeah, I can understand the defense's argument to some extent, at least theoretically, that people have different types of sexual encounters that they will and will not allow. But this kind of goes beyond the usual that I think most people in the jury will think, yeah, you chose to eat feces and chose to do this abuse. I think it's going to be hard for the jury to come up with the defense's response or what they want as a response, but of course, we'll continue to follow it. Turning now to more top legal news, disgraced attorney Michael Avenatti has scored a legal win for now. A judge declared a mistrial 6 weeks into his embezzlement case. Avenatti is known for representing Stormy Daniels and is currently serving a 2.5-year sentence for attempting to extort Nike. For the past 6 weeks, Avenatti was on trial for allegedly stealing nearly $10 million in settlement funds from several clients. In this case, Avenatti served as his own lead counsel. He successfully argued prosecutors failed to turn over complete financial records. A new trial is now scheduled for October. Now to the major leagues, and the former Los Angeles Angels official now accused of supplying drugs to MLB players. Ex-public relations director Eric Kay is accused of distributing fentanyl, which investigators say led to the overdose death of Angels pitcher Tyler Skaggs in 2019. Kay is set to stand trial in October for Skaggs' death. Now, prosecutors say they plan to present testimony from 5 players who say they too received oxycodone from Kay. Kay is pleading not guilty. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, why the famous album cover from Nirvana is now the subject of a lawsuit. But first, the Parkland shooting. We speak with the attorney for the former school resource officer, his response to parents blaming the officer for not going inside the building, next.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back. The attorney for the former school resource officer accused of child neglect in the Parkland school shooting is speaking out about the case. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with the interview of Scott Peterson's lawyer.
Brian, Scott Peterson's lawyer had asked that all of the charges filed against him, including child neglect and perjury, be dismissed. He lost that request, and his attorney says he is innocent.
What I learned, he did nothing wrong. Everything he did was meant to save lives, and certainly he did nothing criminally wrong.
Attorney Mark Eiglarsh on his client, former Broward County School Resource Officer Scott Peterson. Peterson is accused of neglecting children by not entering Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018 as Nicholas Cruz shot and killed 17 people and wounded 17 others.
You don't do justice for all these people who died by doing an injustice against my client.
Peterson faces 7 counts of child neglect, culpable negligence, and perjury. Eiglarsh says Peterson made decisions based on the information he was receiving in real time that day. Peterson has been roundly criticized for not going into the school. Eiglarsh says he followed policy.
He takes a tactical position of cover and didn't know until Cruz was gone where he had been and what he was doing. The second position is, even if he did know, which he did not, his policy at the time makes it clear that may confront the shooter. It gave him that option. He could wait and call SWAT and contain, but he didn't know.
The families of those killed feel differently. Jamie Gutenberg was killed that day. Her father tweeted when Peterson was charged in 2019, "You could have saved some of the 17. You could have saved my daughter."
Now, Mark Eiglarsh also argued that Scott Peterson would not be considered a caregiver under the child neglect statute. He says a caregiver is somebody like a parent or a teacher, but prosecutors say that Peterson would be considered a caregiver. He will be back in court in December. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Back to discuss the latest in the Parkland shooting saga is legal analysts Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Terry, why does it matter if Peterson is considered a caregiver or not? And what do you think he is under the law?
As a caregiver, Brian, there's a slightly higher duty, and I think it would make the case a little bit easier to have him classified as a caregiver. But the point is, whether or not he's a caregiver, he still has a duty. He was hired, he was paid to protect the school, to protect the students at that school, and he failed to do that. And there is a culpable negligence charge here, and the jury could easily find that he was negligent. So I think the decision to let the jury decide and not dismiss these charges makes complete sense. Under the case law, we could see a change in the actual definition of caregiver if this case goes in that direction.
Now, Dina, whether or not there's a trial, there are charges at least, and this case could have huge implications for the country when it comes to officers in schools. What do you think the correct result here should be, and should this be a criminal or a civil matter?
Well, I think it's great that it's going in front of a jury so that they can decide these issues in fact. I think there is enough under the law. Let's see about like a doctor, right? So if a doctor in a hospital doesn't give care to a patient, they can be liable for that neglect to do that. I think that's very similar. You have certain jobs in this country where when you take on that job, you take on a responsibility of care. So I think here it was good to have brought this charge, and maybe it makes it clear if you're going to be taking on this role, there is going to be some sort of obligation put on you to carry out your job.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because I could also see the argument that this would have a chilling effect on people wanting to take this job because they have to throw their life on the line. But we'll see how it plays out. And Jeanette, what's next for Nikolas Cruz's case?
Well, his trial date has not been scheduled yet, and his lawyers have said that he would plead guilty in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. Prosecutors have not agreed to do that. They want this case to go to a jury, and Cruz is scheduled to be back in court next week for hearings on several motions.
All right, so those are two potential trials coming out of this school shooting. We'll see how it plays out, and of course, give you updates as it continues. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, Durst's 6th day on cross-examination, his clapback to the prosecutor. Plus, an iconic album cover and why the subject is suing the band 30 years later. Exclusive legal analysis after the break. We're back. And it's not smelling much like teen spirit for the famous Nirvana album, Nevermind. The man who was the infant photographed on the cover is now suing, claiming the image is child pornography. Spencer Eldon was 4 months old when he was photographed for one of the most iconic album covers of all time, Nirvana's 1991 album, Nevermind. It was widely interpreted that the album cover depicting a naked baby in a pool reaching out for a dollar bill on a fishhook is an anti-capitalism statement. Addon, however, now has a different interpretation. The now 30-year-old is suing the remaining members of the band, Kurt Cobain's estate, and the record company on grounds of child pornography, stating that his infant self portrays a sex worker. The lawsuit states that defendants intentionally commercially marketed Spencer's child pornography and leveraged the shocking nature of his image to promote themselves and their music at his expense. The now adult is known for recreating the album cover with swim trunks on multiple occasions, most recently on the 25th anniversary of the album's release. For the record, we're not showing the full picture there of the album cover, just so you know, but let's bring back legal analyst Dina Dahl and co-host Terry Austin to make sense of this iconic album cover. Terry, is this a case about child pornography, that Nirvana profited from this cover and he did not, or something different altogether?
Brian, this is one of the most bizarre cases I have ever seen. First of all, Eldon took advantage of this cover photo and it gave him fame. And now all of a sudden, he's claiming that it's child pornography. And technically, under the definition, you have to have some sort of involvement or sexually explicit something on the picture. And that doesn't exist here. And I think the fact that he has been using this should be used against him. And I think the case should be dismissed altogether. I think to your point, he's upset he hasn't gotten paid. And perhaps, maybe they should make some payment to him. And the fact that he's been using it all this time means he's kind of given consent.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about a settlement on this side and this case goes away. Dina, in the original cover, you can definitely see it all. But does this fit the definition of child pornography, or is it perhaps artwork?
Right, and that's the thing. One of the exceptions to child pornography is that there is a serious artistic merit. And you can this was on a music cover that's actually been on it for such a long time that if the public had had some sort of reaction, right? Usually pornography kind of is based on how people react to it. We would have had an outcry when this first came out. So you could argue very easily that this is similar to naked pictures of children that we see in art museums all the time. It is true here. It could also have some sort of a contractual argument. It's unclear whether or not his parents clearly consented to the nudity of this picture. And what he's asking for, only $150,000 per defendant, seems so reasonable that I imagine we're going to have a settlement in this case and it won't actually go to trial.
Absolutely. It will be interesting to see the trial, but I agree with you, Dina, that a settlement is probably the closest thing that we're going to see on the horizon for this case. Thank you both. When we come back, Robert Durst thinks Kathy might still be alive. How the prosecutor is fighting what he thinks are lies from the accused murderer. Welcome back. We're back in California for the 50th day of Robert Durst's murder trial and day 6 of Robert Durst's cross-examination. Robert Durst is testifying in his own defense, claiming that he did not murder his best friend Susan Berman execution style in December 2000. It is alleged that Susan had exclusive information about Robert Durst's missing wife, Kathy, a murder that the real estate heir is also accused of. Investigators say Berman placed a phone call pretending to be Durst's missing wife to call in sick to her medical school rotation. Outside the presence of the jury, the judge gave his opinion on the matter.
I think there's overwhelming evidence that Susan Berman made the call, and that there's overwhelming evidence that Susan Berman did make the call. The question here is the implication is that no one else would have done it. There is no one else, and so the people are entitled to present their theory if there's any evidence to support it.
Then, when the jury was brought in, things got heated on the stand, with Lewin and Durst trying to get under each other's skin. This was met with interesting remarks from the defendant.
Are you stalling for time right now? Is that what this is about?
Am I stalling for time? I'm in jail.
Overruled. He asked the witness if he's stalling for time. The witnesses.
Let's assume you're lying right now. Let's assume
I'm telling the truth right now.
Well, that can be a hypothetical the defense gives you. That's not my hypothetical. Let's assume you're lying right now.
It's your heart that's racing, not mine.
Would you?
Then John Lewin caught Durst in what could be another slip-up about what he thinks really happened to Kathy. The prosecutor brought it up again to the judge when the jury was not in the courtroom.
Did not make up a story about how Kathy had died. To the best of my knowledge, Kathy is still living. I've accepted for a good while that she must be dead.
Your explanation literally 60 seconds ago was, I believe Kathy Durst is still alive today. So which is it? As you sit up here, there are so many lies coming out of your mouth that you can't even keep track of what the actual lies are, what the lies that you've made on top of the lies are, and you're confused about everything.
I am not confused. I told very few lies.
Committed more perjury than I've ever seen in my life. I believe the court would say he's never seen this amount of perjury. There's so much perjury that when I'm impeaching him about perjury, he commits more perjury. I almost can't even keep track of all the perjury.
I can't keep track of how many times John Lewin says perjury, but let's dive in. Dina, what do you make of Judge Wyndham saying there was overwhelming evidence that Berman made the call for Kathy? Do you agree or disagree?
I think what he was saying was that the prosecution could present that theory in their questioning because they've already introduced overwhelming evidence. He wasn't necessarily proving he wasn't necessarily saying that point has been proved. And I think he's absolutely right. There's been overwhelming evidence presented. I mean, I personally saw more than 3 hours of a student talk about how unlikely it would have been for Kathy to have made the phone call to the dean of the school. So I think the judge is absolutely right about that. There is going to be a lot for this jury to parse through, including the perjury upon perjury that a prosecutor just mentioned there. It's going to be very convoluted, and that's what Durst wants. He wants to make this convoluted.
Absolutely. More confusion definitely helps the defense. Terry, in the latest episode of Grumpy Old Men, I mean California versus Robert Durst, is Durst doing himself any favors getting under Lewin's skin, or is this just who he is?
Brian, listen, this is definitely Durst being Durst. I hope, though, that through all of this, the jury is able to look at this evidence and make a determination based on the evidence and not make a determination on who's doing the better argument, who's the nicer person, who's being mean. And, you know, ultimately, Lewin looks much better when he sticks to what the evidence is, when he's more controlled, when he's not talking in sarcastic terms. I think the jury appreciates that and wants him to be more straightforward. So kudos to him for getting all this out, but I think he shouldn't let Durst get under his skin.
Absolutely. John Lewin wants Durst to play his game rather than the other way around. Dina, Terry, thank you. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.